Hello there, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about isms, particularly one dirty word that starts with an R and ends in ism. So yes, we're going to be talking about racism. We're also going to be lightly touching on other forms of isms and how we apply that in our conversations. So starting off, first and foremost, racism is about power. There's a power imbalance between one group and another. So the question I posed at the beginning is, can a minority be racist? To which a lot of people like to use this as those whataboutisms that I talked about in the first video. What about this? What about that? This can't be normal. But as I stated before, there's often not objective definitions when it comes to social science and sociology. At least I don't personally believe there are. There's always going to be exceptions to every sociological rule out there. The point of sociological theory and throwing rules out there and definitions out there is so that we have a consensus of what the majority is like. So normally, minorities could not be racist because there's often a power imbalance in place that prevents that from happening. I don't know if it's 80% of the time, 90% of the time, 95% of the time. We all have different subjective experiences. So when you hear things like a minority can't be racist, they're speaking about that 70, 80, 90% of people that are affected by a power imbalance, as most minorities are. So we kind of throw that out there as a general rule for the sake of discussion, for the sake of bridging gaps, for the sake of understanding each other better. But yes, we can go back to the first episode and discuss whataboutisms, and even though that's not usually productive. So that being said, I'll just jump into something to help us understand this a little better, like sexism. I'm a professor, so if there's a young woman in my class and I tell her, this is my guy over here and he's better than you, or whatever, that's a sexist statement. Now, if they both turn in the same work, but I give my guy a better grade, now I'm guilty of sexism. So that's what ism is all about. There's a power imbalance. So I asserted my power as a professor to give my guy a better grade than her. So that's an example of sexism. Now, I can make a sexist statement that doesn't make me necessarily guilty of sexism. I can just say men are better than women. That's a sexist statement. But if I haven't asserted any authority, that is not sexism. So it's important to lock that in because it also applies in ageism. And then, of course, what this video is about, which is racism. So we have many institutions in our society that are traditionally ran by predominantly a white group of people. That's just the nature of our country from its foundation to now. Minority groups haven't permeated all of societal institutions. So that being said, I myself have been on several committees and boards for organizations that are predominantly white. And sometimes they can have policies that end up being racist without even knowing it. I would say for the most part, in my experience, that it usually goes unknown. And people aren't inherently bad in trying to be racist. But it still happens and it still affects a lot of minorities. So it's important to discuss and it's important to acknowledge like where it happens and where it doesn't. So I think we can have meaningful conversations that recognize, yes, there are exceptions, but that's not what overall society is talking about right now. So again, racism, there's an application of power involved. Prejudice, as a review, I just think I'm better than this group over here. Discrimination, I think I'm going to act out against this group over here. Racism is where you get more specific. When you add that ism, you're becoming more specific. So discrimination against women on my part could be seen as sexism. Discrimination based on race from my part could be seen as racism, especially if I'm in power over a situation, which for the most part, right here in the United States and central Indiana, I am not the person with the authoritative power. Most of the institutions where I live are predominantly white, and that's okay. I just want to get out there that there are societal imbalances with power involved. And that power dynamic is so important to understanding racism because without that power dynamic, racism cannot exist. So you could probably think of more whataboutisms based on what I just said. And as I told you before, not everything is going to be 100%. Do you have prejudice? Have you discriminated? Have you committed racist acts, or are you guilty of racism, being a racist person? Those are all things we can look into ourselves and reflect on. uh, are we acting based on preconceived notions and prejudices that we have, also known as ethnocentrism? Are we acting on our own beliefs and our own power and our own authority? We can decide whether what we're doing, if we're guilty of racism or any other kind of ism. I just think these things are important for self-reflection. This is not important for accusing you, for accusing anybody of anything. I bring all these things up for self reflection, because we can all do better. I can do better. You can do better. I'm not calling anybody out, and I'm not expecting you to necessarily call anybody out unless you see a harsh injustice going on in your community. But it's always worth reflecting on, and it's always worth discussing. So go ahead, leave me your questions and comments. Email them to me, however you can get them to me, and we can discuss this further. We're going to move on to things like microaggressions and how they affect mental health. We're going to move on to decolonization and what that looks like. So